is 2UE.
In the meantime, here's something for you. There's a big auction being held this weekend in the United States. It's to do with Bonnie and Clyde. Clyde Barrow, Bonnie Parker, they were in their early 20s. And back in the Depression era, they went on a crime spree involving petrol stations and small stores. They killed a lot of police officers, the gang of which they were part, but these two have become part of American folklore, Bonnie and Clyde. And the auction being held this weekend is quite an amazing thing. They're auctioning, for instance, a Colt 38 snub-nosed detective special revolver. It was actually found taped to the inside of Bonnie Parker's thigh after they were killed in their car. It was bullet-riddled, the car, and the police were apparently allowed to go in there and grab what they could. And they found this. It's being auctioned. They've also got Clyde's personal Colt 45, which was recovered post-mortem from his waistband. Watches, cosmetic cases, all sorts of things being auctioned over this weekend by the celebrity auction house R Auctions. Bobby Livingston is the man. He was joined by Clyde Barrow's nephew Buddy earlier today, and I spoke to them both. First of all, with Bobby Livingston, the auctioneer, telling us how all this came about.
Sure. The key items of this collection were put together by a man named Robert Davis of Waco, Texas. He had a great passion for collecting Bonnie and Clyde items, and he bought these two handguns that came from the Hamer estate in 1986 in Austin. And then he bought Marie Barrow's watch that had belonged to Clyde Barrow at a famous sale in 1997. So we've got a world-class collection of items available for auction this Sunday.
Why do you think there is so much interest all these years on in a couple of people who were violent criminals?
I think it's a tragic love story between two kids that were seen as rebelling against society and against the banks. And you have to remember, this was at the height of the Depression. There was no jobs. There was no hope. And I think once these photographs of them were published after being in Joplin, Missouri, it really made them front-page news, and the general public began to respect them in a way they hadn't previously.
Okay. Now, you've got Buddy Barrow with you. If you could put him on the phone. He's the nephew of Clyde Barrow. Mr. Barrow, good morning.
How's everything in your part of the world, man?
Not too bad. Now, from your point of view, you carry the name. He was your uncle, Clyde Barrow?
Yes, sir. My dad was L.C. Barrow, Clyde's little brother, the youngest brother of the Barrow boys.
Yeah, so, and he had to carry the name. It caused him great trouble, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. It followed him probably as far as I can remember. I think it was probably about 1958 or 59. My dad got stopped for a speeding violation, and the first thing that came out of the officer's mouth, he says, "Oh, you one of those badass Barrow boys. I want you to put your hands on the car and spread your feet." And all my dad did was just made a wrong right turn. Clyde protected my father by, he was the last of the Barrow boys, and he didn't want Clyde, and didn't want my dad, to wind up like they were fisting to wind up. Buck had already been killed. It was just a matter of time. Clyde knew he was going to be killed, so they tried to, steer my dad the other direction. He did pretty good.
What was it like for you growing up hearing these stories? At what age did they tell you of this family connection?
Well, when I was real young, I guess I was probably about 6 or 7, and the first time I saw the photograph of the death car, I just, I asked us, was anybody in these cars, was they shot up like that? And my dad just told me, he says, when you get older, I'll tell you more. But right now, I want you to go outside and play.
yeah, and he did tell you one day.
They protected us, and I guess I was about 12, 13, and my dad was driving a truck, and I went with him on some road trips, and my dad got to reminiscing and talking about different things, and as long as I didn't ask a question, he'd continue to talk. But once I asked a question, he said, I don't want to talk about this no more. So I learned to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah. It's an intriguing one because they were violent criminals, but they have been romanticised over the years. How do you see Clyde?
Well, I mean, it was a different time, and people, I don't know, the South was being hit a lot harder than the North was as far as the Depression. It hit Texas and all the southern states long before the bank failure of 1929. But people were losing their farms, because they couldn't produce crops. They had a dust bowl going on at the same time as the Depression, so they couldn't grow the crops because of the dust bowl and stuff. So people were losing their farms. The banks were repossessioned, and the banks were failing, losing people's money. They put their savings. It just wiped them out. They had no recourse. They rooted the people who rebelled the government, that were actually taken away from them. So they didn't have TVs, they only had a radio back then. So it became like a soap opera. You had these two kids that were running from the law that was, they were actually doing what the banks were doing to them, so they were
stealing from people.
Yeah. Yeah, the banks were taking people's property, and they felt like if you're stealing from the bank, then you're doing exactly what the bank's doing to you.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like, that you're not ashamed of what happened?
Well, when I was growing up, like I said, this was a taboo subject. They didn't want us kids to think this was a glamorized deal. It was a very tragic story. It's like if one of your children have got off and had been shot, wondering, scared. He's laying on the side of the road, dying with a bullet hole in him. You can't go to him. If you do, then you take a chance of being arrested for harboring a criminal. So they did everything they could to try to keep their children alive, even though Clyde didn't, as far as a cold-blooded killer, he wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He was somebody that, he had done wrong, but if say, for instance, he was asleep in a car and the police officer walked up to him and says, "Hey, sir, you can't do this, you're going to have to move on," Clyde would crank up and move on. But if that officer walked up to him and got belligerent and pointed a gun at him, you've got a totally different war now. Because Clyde hated that authority had been pushed down his throat, and he rebelled against it.
Can you understand people that would hear this and think, well, you're actually making excuses for a murderer?
I don't make no excuses, man. Like I said, it was a terrible thing for anybody to happen, But I understand why he turned the way he did.
Yep. All right. Look, it's going to be a fascinating weekend watching all this stuff, which is really part of your history, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is. It's like I said, it's since 1967. I never dreamed it would be this much interesting.
Yeah. Nice to talk to you. I thank you for your time. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
There is Mr. Buddy Barrow. He's actually in his early 60s. He's the nephew of Clyde Barrow, and that auction's being held this weekend. It's RR Auction.